Hello and welcome to Rasabha TV. You're watching discussion today with your host Rajat Kain. In this edition of show, we'll talk about new guidelines framed by the government in regard to social media and the OTT platforms. The Ministry of Electronics and Information Technology, along with Ministry of Information Broadcasting, said it undertook elaborate consultations among themselves in order to have a harmonious and soft-touch oversight mechanism in relation to social media platforms as well as digital media and the OTT platforms. Among the guidelines framed, social media giants will be required to appoint India-based compliance officers. If they remove content, they will be required to inform users and give the reasons for the same as to why this decision has been taken. Social media sites have to disclose the first originator of any mischievous message in terms if there is any complaint. The oversight mechanism will include a committee with representatives from the Ministries of Defense, External Affairs, Home, Information Broadcasting, Law, IT, Women and Child Development. And it will have a motu powers. That means they can take decision on their own to call hearings on the complaints of violation of Code of Ethics if it wants or if it is warranted. Now, to discuss more on this issue, we join a panel of two guests. Karan, Taurani, he is Vice President, Research Analyst from Elara Capital. Many thanks, Karan, for joining us. And Anuj Agarwal, he is Cyber Law Expert Advocate practicing in Delhi. Many thanks. Let me start with you, Tarun, first. At the outset, what do you have to say about the guidelines that's just been framed, rather it's been framed and declared by the government this afternoon?
Right. Thanks for that. I think the guidelines are very much in line with expectations.
Okay.
I think what I was not expecting is that there shouldn't be a blanket censorship on OTT because if a blanket censorship were to come in, you will probably see a lot of restrictions in terms of the creativity aspect and the type of content which has to be there. But some kind of regulation or some kind of interference is necessary because you had to create a level playing field with TV. I think in my earlier interview with your channel itself, with Mr. Sharma, who was the TRI secretary, I was very strongly of this opinion that some kind of regulation had to come in. A stricter control, a stricter self-regulation on OTT is something which is thankfully coming, for the industry.
Okay.
And I think what's going to happen here is that many of these OTT platforms, which were earlier relying only on nudity and violence kind of content, I think they will probably, shut shop or probably scale down. So you'll see a situation wherein the larger OTTs, the global giants, the broadcast OTTs, they will continue to have an edge in the market because of the kind of content they make. But specifically OTTs which were targeting nudity and violent content, I think is going to be a very tough time, for these kind of OTTs here. As far as social media is concerned, I don't think there is anything negative whatsoever on that. In fact, removing negative content, removing fake news will make social media all the more reliable. You'll probably see a situation, wherein people really want to glue onto social media even more because of absence of negative content. Because over a point of time, what happened exactly was that, there was an overdose of negative content, overdose of violence which was coming on social media. You had no control in terms of what content is getting uploaded. So I think some kind of regulation, some kind of interference on that is also something which had to be there. Otherwise, broader aspect, if you look at the India digital story, I think that is here to stay because of favorable demographics. So I don't see any impact in terms of digital advertising business per se, because your demographics are very favorable even now. You have cheap data prices, you have increased smartphone penetration, you have a large youth base. So I think overall, on a net basis, digital business won't see much of a big impact because of this regulation.
Right. That's many thanks, Tarun, for your opening remarks. Let me have you, Anuj, here. Like the social media and digital platforms are here to stay, as Tarun just also pointed out. Now, when it comes to these rules, let me understand from you how important was to regulate or to have guidelines governing social media and the OTT to begin with, Anuj.
See, so far what was happening that all these platforms were claiming that they are being regulated by the rules and the laws of their parent countries. For example, Twitter and Facebook, they're both US based. So whenever the law enforcement agencies were approaching them to help in the investigation process,
Right.
They were taking recourse to saying that it is all governed by the privacy laws or the freedom of expression in the US Constitution and the laws. And a lot of important investigations were getting hampered or they were not reaching to any conclusion, especially in case of the violence against women, nudity, and socially and religiously sensitive content. Now the government is trying to reach out to them through this regulation and saying that they must disclose who has originated this content. So this is, I think, a very important step to stop the hate content being freely floated on the social media platforms. Second, the government has brought a new concept of a digital media through which they have now combined the intermediaries as well as the OTT platforms in one and the same regime. Because earlier, taking advantage of the relaxed guidelines on the intermediaries because they were basically for facilitating the e-commerce platforms and not peddling the news. So they had been taking advantage of that safe harbor there. I think government has now brought both of them together, which is a welcome step. It will help us actually in the development of these platforms because these platforms are becoming so vicious and one-sided that we were not, as an ordinary person, if I look myself, I was always scared of children and the young people utilizing them. Although government itself has recognized the fact these platforms have really given a voice to the common persons in this country. So this is something very, very important that the government has recognized that they are very, very important for the democracy and free flow of ideas in this country.
Right.
And as per the constitutional mandate, every citizen has a right to express himself, herself.
Absolutely.
And these platforms were doing a great job for doing that. But somewhere down the line, utilizing that freedom and the constitutional guarantee, some people within that organization has taken a very wise approach and have suppressed certain important point of view. Although certain people, for example, I may not like certain content or certain point of view politically or socially, but it doesn't mean it should be suppressed. It should be made available to the informed citizens of this country. And it is important that the citizens of the country make a collective opinion. So I think it is a very balanced approach and it will help develop these platforms as well as the freedom of expression in this country, which is very, very important.
Anuj, many thanks, Anuj. I'll surely come back to you on the balanced approach, but let me have Karan here and ask him about the balancing act of having the platform, giving them space, as you mentioned, a creative space, and at the same time having governing or rather making sure that nothing vicious goes on. Now, how does this balancing act will happen? Isn't it a very thin line to actually tread? Karan?
Yes, definitely. Yeah, definitely. It is a very thin line. The ministry also pointed out in their opening remarks that, they had given 100 days to the OTTs to kind of come up with a self-regulation code. Many things were done. There were consistent follow-ups. So this code actually has not come overnight. It's a process. It's been almost 2.5 years that the government is kind of, really been behind these OTTs to come up with a proper code which can be followed as per norms. But as you clearly know, because of multiple reasons, nothing actually happened, on the ground in terms of something constructive coming out, which is why the government had to interfere. And my guess here is that, of course, right now we are in a stage wherein there is some kind of self-regulation, some kind of minor interference. But if the situation were to persist and, if there are more controversies, there is more violence, more fake news, and more kind of negative content getting uploaded, be it on social media or be it on controversies, being created, by web series like Tandav, don't be surprised that this self-regulation also goes to some other level and probably the interference may just increase from here on. So I think the OTTs and the social media giants really need to be careful right now in terms of what content is getting uploaded. And it's time that they take charge and take control of whatever is coming on the platforms.
Well, when you say they have to be careful, again, like aren't we just treading the line? Okay, fine. As you also mentioned that too much of interference or too much of regulation may just hamper creativity. And as these platforms are now being deemed to be considered as something which has given voice to those who were not the mainstream ones. So how will it go forward then? Karan?
I think the creative people here will actually kind of realize in terms of what content is to be made, So back in the days, you had no focus, or probably you had an approach wherein the creative people were not too much involved in terms of what content is being made. Specifically in India, the problem is OTT is just about 4 to 5 years old, and the entire OTT uptake has actually been after Geo 4G getting launched in 2016-17, somewhere around that time. And I think it's like a learning right now. We are still in a very nascent state right now. OTT still is in a very small stage. And I think as time goes by, we'll kind of try and fix the errors and try and resolve these issues. So it's still very early days in terms of where it's happening, but I'm sure that even the creative directors or the people who are making the content will now kind of be responsible, will kind of think twice in terms of what is the content they are making, whether it's factually correct. If it is the fiction-based content as well, how it is being presented, to the normal public. I think these are things which will now be discussed at more length as compared to what it was earlier. It's overall a very healthy thing for the industry.
Right, right. So, of course, like creativity will go on. That's what, Karan, you underline here, even after these guidelines. So, that's a welcome thing. Anuj, as we discussed, we just talked about the balancing act. Now, here, how the mechanism do you see working in future in terms of having freedom of speech, freedom of thought, at the same time, making sure that the vicious content, fake news, and something which is targeted at a particular entity with a devious sort of mindset should not be there in the mainstream. Now here the government also has a motu power, and of course, do you see lots of people coming with grievances कि साहब मुझे ये चीज़ पसंद नहीं है, or there is a problem with this, it's happening with the tweet, it happened with the programs, but do you see more such complaints coming up?
Yes, of course, there would be more such complaints would be coming up, because now the government is asking all of them to have a resident grievance officer. So they must appoint, especially those who have got significant presence, 5 lakh subscriber, etc., to have a local grievance officer. So people will definitely come up with more complaints and grievances. Here it is very, very important that the body which is appointed to take up these grievances at the second level, they must be unbiased, and they should be free from the government influence.
Okay.
Because in the past also we have seen that we have bodies like censor board, and they have neither been very effective in controlling the hateful or the religious focused content, nor they had been able to satisfy the people or the government. So either side, they had always been at the receiving end. This time we should have a composition of the body in such a manner. Number one, they should be able to do justice to the constitution. That is the freedom of expression. That is on the topmost. Right. Nobody, including the government, should have any chance to suppress the freedom of expression in the name of helping people or curating the hateful content. So that should not be allowed, because people may have different point of view at different point of time. But yes, it had been seen, especially the violence against the women, the nudity and the hateful content focused against the ultra minorities of this country. You see, our country is composed of very many minorities, where there are people who are even in the few lakhs, and they constitute a minority, linguistic minority, or some sort of a minority. They do not have the political power to influence decision making at the center or even at the state. So these kind of people should be protected very effectively by a body which is going to look into their genuine problems, their genuine complaints, not to be influenced by a bheed tantra. It should not, these bodies should not be influenced where the number of the people making a complaint should be very high. So of late we have seen there had been certain people who are coming in big groups and making complaints to various forums, including judicial forums, and trying to get relief, which is against the ultra or the micro minorities of this country. So we should not have a situation arising in which our minorities, linguistic minorities or religious minorities, get totally hampered, get totally suppressed. So that balancing act has to be made. Otherwise, control of these content has become very important. In certain elections, we have seen that even the president of the most powerful country, he was also kind of censored.
Absolutely.
I think it is always desirable that we should allow people to express their opinion, Whether somebody likes it or not, that is his
Yes,
mature opinion.
that's true. That's true.
So that's the way. That's a risk out here, and we must ensure that in all fairness, everybody should have a voice. OTT platforms should ensure creativity, newer thought process, because they had been helping a lot of people, not only in the entertainment but new thought process. Young people are getting advantage and they are getting opportunities because of these platforms. So we should not at all suppressing this, but they should not be allowed to become agenda driven. They should be allowed to entertainment driven. They should be allowed to be creating social harmony and taking everybody along.
Right, certainly. But again, it comes to be a very thin line, as we are saying. This entire debate is extremely thin line. Like how, I mean, the moment, or rather, in just one sequence, entertainment certainly takes shape of some sort of an agenda. That's excellent point, Anuj here. Karan, so far we have seen this very pointed query towards these social media giants. Extremely pointed query. It's a simple thing. We have seen, as Anuj also pointed out, that in many criminal investigations we have seen, but they have been, they have this excuse, okay, we don't operate here as per the law of the land, the country, so-and-so country. We are registered in so-and-so country, we have a server in so-and-so country, and we have a country director in so-and-so country. So have there been, from the point of view, from the end of these social media giants, any skirting of issues whenever it comes to subscribing to the law of land of the country where they're operating, or rather where the grievances are coming?
Yeah, you're absolutely right. There have been instances where there has been a blame game being played. Again, not fair to name any of the OTT, not fair to name any of the social media platforms. But the problem here is that, social media apparently was reaching a stage right now wherein there was too much of negativity, too much of fake news. And I think some amount of subscriber base or your customer base was also kind of getting ticked off with that, right? And I think what's going to happen with this, as I told you, just like the OTT, that they are going to take things seriously. The creative directors, producers will now give it a very deep thought in terms of what is the kind of web series, what is the kind of script, what is the kind of show they want to, showcase in the OTT platform. I think similar situation is going to happen for social media as well, wherein you'll see a lot of filtering of content, right? So no doubt, even right now, people will be, putting on whatever content basis the freedom, whatever they have right now. But there'll be some amount of filtering, which is indeed a very good step, for the industry as a whole, because somewhere I think that freedom also has to kind of be controlled in some or the other way if it is going beyond control. So that's how the situation is going to be.
Right. Well, Anuj, I mean, what do you have to say on this? I mean, certainly you have your word earlier, but I need you to elaborate on it. Many a times we have seen social media giants pinpointing and saying we don't operate here, or we don't operate as per law here, or our country offices are in some other country. So now that thing obviously will change for better?
It had been a regular hindrance on their side, and I would say it has reached to the nuisance proportions. There are n number of investigations in this country in which, because they are pending because of the non-cooperation of these platforms. Again, we are not going to name, or that's not the objective of this program.
Sure.
But I can tell you that those cases are running into thousands. And there the victims are especially the vulnerable sections of the society, the women and the children, where a lot of fake profiles, nudity, sexual content, pornography, revenge porn is uploaded on a regular basis just to harass them. There had been many instances of suicides and other extreme situations arising because these platforms have not responded well in time with sufficient information for the law enforcement agencies to move forward quickly and stop that kind of a atrocity happening against those vulnerable sections of the society. So now the government has come up with certain guidance and guidelines and regulations. 2-3 things are very, very significant, which I see. Number one, government has asserted, which was always the legal position, that they will be now strictly observing the rule and the law of the land, which is India based, and they will appoint definitely an officer who is resident, and that officer will be responsible for compliance. So in case they are not complying with the local laws, the laws of India, and not responding to the investigating agencies and helping the people out here, they will be directly responsible. They will have have to have a presence. So it is very, very significant. And second, the government has said that the digital media, which means intermediaries, that is the e-commerce companies, as well as the social media and OTT platforms, they will now be governed by a similar set of regulations. Earlier, what was happening that wherever the regulations were favoring to the platforms, they were calling themselves in that category. If it was helping them to call themselves intermediaries because intermediary regulations were very relaxed, even the OTT platforms are calling themselves intermediaries and vice versa. See, the social media platforms are actually broadcasting platforms. They had always been media platforms. They are not intermediaries in legally sense, but they were taking advantage of that. So government, in a very smart and brilliant move, has merged all this and have made the regulations applicable to them all, and also recognizing the fact that they are very, very important for furtherance of freedom of expression in this country, which is a fundamental right guaranteed by our beloved constitution. So it is useful that the government has, even in these, while issuing these guidelines, have reiterated this particular concept, which shows their concern for the freedom of expression and fundamental rights. So I think it will help everyone to have better confidence in these platforms, and this will help people to take advantage of these platforms, as well as these to make these platforms more responsible towards the people directly.
Right, right. Karan, as we are just about to wrap up the show, I mean, do you agree that these regulations or these directions will obviously inspire confidence in terms of these social media giants and the regulation here, responsibility towards the country they're operating in, and of course, like even the OTT platforms, respecting their own creative freedom as well?
Yes, I'm sure, there is going to be a very balanced approach in terms of the way they operate. As I earlier pointed out, filtering of content, complaint redressal, all these are very positive moves. There have been multiple pending cases. There have been situations wherein, there have been atrocities against women, against the minor, and against against some of the parts of society, some of the people who are basically poor. So I think all these things is going to, lead for a better society, living a healthy well-being, and that is what the government's motive is all about.
Right.
And this is how it is in the way forward. But I think we still need to wait and watch in terms of what happens over the next 2 to 3 years, because as I told you, we are still in very early stages of the digital revolution. If the situation is not under control, you may see a problem herein wherein the government might interfere further from here on, and they may go beyond self-regulation. So that is one aspect which we need to watch upon, but that will only happen as per time unfolding.
Right, right. Many thanks, Karan, for joining us, elucidating on this important aspect. And of course, many thanks, Anuj Agarwal, for making us apprised with the situation and of course the challenges ahead. And we hope, all of us hope here, the balance between the creative latitude and the law of land, the respect for law continues in all the spheres. Many thanks, gentlemen, for joining us. Many thanks to our viewers watching this edition of Discussion Today.